In recent years, as computing has become central to most fields of study, so too has the education and research being performed at Georgia Tech's College of Computing. One person who has been here throughout those changes is Charles Isbell, the new John P. Imlay Jr. Dean of Computing. Dean Isbell was instrumental in forward-thinking programs that anticipated this rise, like Threads in the College of Computing, in which students combine regular computer science instruction with classes related to particular areas of application. Today, we'll chat with Dean Isbell about the importance of maintaining this interdisciplinary approach, the potential challenges facing computer science education and computing as a whole in the coming years, his priorities for the college to meet those head-on, and much more. I'm Ayanna Howard, Chair of Georgia Tech School of Interactive Computing, and this is the Interaction Hour. Dean Isbell earned his undergraduate degree from Georgia Tech in 1990 before completing a PhD at MIT. He then spent some time at AT&T Shannon Labs before returning to Georgia Tech in 2002 as an assistant professor. After what we can describe as 17 fruitful years as a faculty member and administrator, during which he was instrumental in the development of programs like Threads, the Online Master of Science and Computer Science, and the Constellation Center for Equity in Computing, as of July, he has officially taken over as the Dean of Computing. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about your journey to Dean of College here. So you started out your academic career in this college before it was the College of Computing. What do you remember most about your time here?
Well, so it was college. So I remember what most people remember about college, classes and other things that happen when you're 17, 18, and 19 years old, all the friendships that I made. But what I remember most is being center in Atlanta. So I grew up in Atlanta. I was actually born in Chattanooga, Tennessee. My earliest memory is arriving in Atlanta in a moving truck at the age of 3, so I think of myself as being from Atlanta. And Georgia Tech was always a thing that you heard about in the high school that I went to. I'm a native of the Atlanta public school system, and we always knew about Georgia Tech as a great place to be, and I always knew that one day that I would be here. When I came here and found myself in the center of the city, it was like being in a completely different place from where I grew up. And so I would walk across and I would see the highway, I would see the buildings and the skyline, and I just remembered feeling that I was a part of something really, really big. Now, back at those times, as you say, it was before there was a College of Computing, we were the School of Information and Computer Science, and we were in what we used to call the miscellaneous college at the time. It was called COSALS. There was engineering, and there was us, and I don't even know what the other colleges were, but we were sort of thrown in there with a lot of other people. And there was always this feeling that there was time for us to do more, there was time for us to be bigger, and in fact, the new president at the time came in and said that we were going to create a College of Computing. And so it was just an exciting time to be here.
So you were here back in the day. You then went on to grad school. And after 12 years from when you first stepped foot and graduated from Georgia Tech, you decided to come back. Now, many faculty, they don't really prefer to come back to where they received their degrees, but you decided to place roots in a place where you earned your degree. So what brought you back to the college?
Well, two things. One, frankly, Atlanta. This is where I grew up. This is a wonderful place to be. I lived all over the world or visited all over the world. I've spent time everywhere, and there is no place like the South. There's no place like Atlanta. So it was always wonderful to have a chance to be able to come back and to return to where I grew up, to raise a family and to be happy in the warm climate that is Atlanta. But the other thing that brought me back was Georgia Tech itself. Even when I left, I always felt that Georgia Tech was trying to do something new and interesting. Like I said, it was a very exciting time to be here. And I came back every single year. I met with the faculty, people who I had known when I was an undergrad. I watched what was going on, and I could see the place exploding. When I left, I think the college might have been ranked somewhere in the 30s. And now, even when I came back, it was moving into the 20s and then moving into the teens, and it was just getting better and better and bigger and doing more and more exciting things. And the chance to be able to come back to my home, to come back to Atlanta, and to come back to my home, Georgia Tech, was just, how could I not take advantage of that when the opportunity arose?
So exploding, exciting, Georgia Tech being the center. So now you're dean, and so I want to chat a little bit about your priorities, kind of moving forward to the next stage. Now, I know that one of the things that's really close and near and dear to your heart is this concept of equity. Equity in our field, in student populations, in the communities we're reaching. So let's talk a little bit about why that's so important in the computing community and why it's so important to you.
Well, there are a lot of reasons, but at bottom, it boils down to this. Computing is changing everything. I believe that in my heart. I think it's impossible for anyone not to see that just by looking every day out into the world and thinking about the way that they interact, the way we're talking to each other now. Podcasts didn't exist back in the day. We all have phones that have as much power as all of human history prior to the 1960s, all in our hands. Everything is changing because of computing. Because everything is changing because of computing, it means that everyone's lives are changing. Well, if we're going to change everyone's lives, then it means everyone has to be involved in that conversation. It has to be a real conversation. Everyone has to have an opportunity to be in that conversation. Everyone has to have an opportunity to shape that conversation. Because if you don't do that, the people who create the technology, if they're narrow in their worldview, or what they think of as the possibilities, they will create limits instead of breaking down barriers. So that means that we have to have everyone involved, and in order to have everyone involved, they have to actually have the opportunity to be a part of that conversation. They need a chance to have the education. They need a chance to be able to decide what the next big problem to solve is. Everyone has to be a part of that. And if you don't construct intentionally degree programs, if you don't construct intentionally educational systems, if you aren't intentional about giving everyone that opportunity no matter where they come from, then they will not be a part of those conversations and will be all the poorer for it. When I think about my own personal journey in this, I look back at the past, and one thing that I have come to realize over the years is that none of this had to happen. As I said, I'm from Atlanta. I went to the Atlanta public school system. I spent a year in, let us just say, a deeply suboptimal high school. We had riots. We had fights every week. There was no reason why I would get out through that program, get out through that school, and eventually end up at a place like Georgia Tech or a place like MIT to be a professor, to be a dean. None of that had to happen. But it happened because people decided to believe in me. It happened because people decided to give me the opportunities to grow as much as I was capable of growing. And I think at the very least, all of us owe both to ourselves the realization that all of us have some version of that story, and we owe to everyone else the opportunity to get there. So for me, equity is crucial as opposed to equality. The goal is not just to give everyone the opportunity, but to make certain that they can succeed up to whatever it is they're capable or interested in doing. And so I've made that a central part of what I try to do as an educator. I made that a central part of what I try to do as a researcher.
So given this aspect of equity, what steps do we need to do as a college or as a community to really improve this aspect?
Well, there's a couple of things you can do. And, well, first off, there are no easy answers, right? Because you're asking about how it is you're going to bring people to be a part of a conversation who might not otherwise be a part of the conversation. So we should go into this knowing that it's not easy, right? So that's the first thing. Recognize that it's not easy. Recognize that it's important. Recognize that you have to be deliberate and you have to be intentional in order to make it so. So we cannot do simple things that will make it difficult for people to be a part of the conversation. Little things like, oh, we have too many students, so let's start capping those programs. If we cap the programs, then we'll all be better off. Maybe, but then what you're going to do is you're going to privilege people who already came in prepared because they had the right resources when they were in elementary school or in high school. It means you're going to privilege the people who were confident, whether they should be or not, that they already knew how to do this. And the people who weren't sure, the people who didn't have the background or didn't have the opportunities will not be a part of that conversation. So a really simple thing like that makes perfect sense actually turns out can have bad, disparate impacts. So you have to be very thoughtful, very mindful, and just accept that you're going to have to put in lots of energy and effort in order to bring everyone along, and that it'll be worth it in the long term. So I think most of our programs that we've developed, they're fundamentally interdisciplinary. Most of the things that we have done have been about bringing people in. We take our service role seriously. We work with local high schools. We think about the state of Georgia. We worry about bringing people in, whether it's at the high school level, in college, grad school, or at the professoriate, and we just are very deliberate about having those conversations. That's step one. Be deliberate, be humble, and recognize at the same time that you can make a difference only if you try.
So what I hear is computing education is one of the things that can really break down barriers for the whole entire civilization or community, but also we have a role in this. So let me talk a little bit and kind of poke a little on that. At Georgia Tech, we are privileged. And when I say that is that we are really central, I think, in this whole world of AI. In fact, you were recently on Georgia's public broadcast on Second Thought talking about AI and its implications and what we can do with it. Now, there's some ethical challenges, implications for society in this, and we both have spent a lot of time talking to the public about these things. So what do you see as what we can do in this world of AI, whether it's as a community or as Georgia Tech, to really deal with? And we'll talk first about the ethical implications.
Okay, well, that's a big conversation to have, right? I think, again, it's sort of the same answer I gave before. Be deliberate, be intentional, bring intent. Think very carefully about what it is that you're doing. I said in that conversation, and I've said many times since, and I know that you feel the same way, that the issue here is not whether we're going to build machines that are going to take over the world and, it's going to be Terminator 2. The real issue is that we are building this technology and it's affecting everyone right now. And if you don't bring in the people who are being affected by it, then you're going to affect them in ways you never imagined, and they won't necessarily be good. So in the end, the ethical question is twofold. It's the one that we all think about, which is, well, am I using data properly? Am I, imposing on someone's free will? The kind of things we talk about when we think about ethics. But I think if you pop up a level, a real interesting question is, are we being ethical at all in the way that we engage people in the conversation in the first place? If we are freezing people out, either on purpose or accidentally through thoughtlessness, are we in fact limiting their ability to engage in this? Well, frankly, it's a revolution. And if we are, that to me is a fundamentally unethical stance to take. So if you're not purposely saying to yourself, I'm about to build a piece of technology that will change things, who needs to be involved in this conversation? Who is being left out of this conversation? Then you are not doing your job as a scientist, you're not doing your job as an educator, you're not doing your job as an administrator. There's a thing I like to remind myself of every once in a while. And I think when you talk about that level of what's ethical and what's not ethical, you're actually getting at the heart of it. And it's this. We talk about notions of invisibility, right? And most people, when they think about invisibility, they think about, well, someone's standing in front of me and I don't see them. And that is, in fact, a kind of invisibility. But I think the more pernicious kind of invisibility is when someone is not in front of you and you don't notice their absence. That is the thing that drives us down to making all kinds of mistakes as scientists, all kinds of mistakes as educators that lead to very bad outcomes. I want the college, I want us as researchers, when we think about these ethical questions, to try to remember the people who aren't there and make certain that we see them and make certain that we find them. Because if we don't do that, then there's a whole set of ethical questions, a whole set of questions about what's right, what's fairness, that we will never even consider.
So this sounds like it ties directly back into this conversation we had about equity.
Yes, equity fundamentally is about giving people the ability to succeed. And in order for that to happen, you first have to recognize who they are and to embrace their differences.
So I want to poke a little bit about this invisibility. And if you will, I had heard a story about when you were a grad student and you're a well-known AI researcher now, but as you were going through that process, I recall hearing a story about how an AI algorithm didn't work on you and talking about being invisible.
So I do AI, I do machine learning, particularly I do interactive machine learning. I care about modeling human behavior. I have never done computer vision. I've never been particularly good at it. The people who do that, they're amazing, great, awesome. Every single one of you doing computer vision out there, you're amazing. My one contribution to computer vision was as a grad student. Some people who were working at MIT on doing face recognition came to me in a bit of a huff explaining how I was breaking all of their algorithms. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, we've got all these pictures of people and we can't recognize you. And apparently had something to do with the relative skin tone compared to everyone else who was in their data set. So they fixed it by lightening my skin, and then they could recognize me. Eventually they went past that once the paper deadline passed and they needed to do the next thing. They solved that problem. to me, all of these people were my friends. They were all doing great work, and eventually they solved this problem. What's interesting to me about that, and I think gets to what we were talking about before, is that it didn't occur to them beforehand. We know a lot about heart attacks in men. We know very little about heart attacks in women comparatively. We know a lot about breast cancer for women and very little comparatively about breast cancer for men, because people build these models in their heads about what's important and where they should be going and what the default is, and they behave accordingly, and then it drives the science, it drives the inquiry, it drives who we give opportunity to, and obviously we're all the poorer for it.
So again, having this diversity of thought in computing could really address some of these issues, I would think.
No, well, it would have to. And by the way, I think there's two different kinds of diversity we need to talk about. Diversity in terms of gender diversity, ethnic diversity, diversity of experience, backgrounds, whether you come from a rich background, a poor background, you come from the North, you come from the South, you come from the U.S., you come from somewhere else. This is the kind of diversity we normally talk about. But there's a different kind of diversity as well, which is diversity of interest, diversity of domain. We need to have the people who are interested in social work working with AI and working with computing. We need the people who are interested in healthcare working with AI and computing, the people who are doing construction, the people who are doing design. All of these people have to be a part of that conversation in order for us to move forward, because those are the problems that we're trying to solve. Fundamentally, we're trying to have impact. Fundamentally, we're trying to change the world, and the computer scientists or the engineers or whoever can't sit in a room by themselves and do that. You have to engage with the people who are living. I will say that although this is the right thing to do, it's not easy. So one thing that the literature tells us is that if you bring diverse groups together, you get better outcomes, but those groups aren't necessarily happier. There's more fighting, there's more disagreement, there's more trying to understand the other person, there's more explaining things you think should be obvious because they're a part of your experience. And so it's not easy. It's not easy to have the difficult conversations you need to have. It's not easy to change your jargon. It's not easy to talk to people who don't have the same background you have. And it's not easy to hear people who come from a different background, a different set of assumptions than you. But it's well worth the effort in the end. You should go in with the right expectations. It will be more difficult, but it absolutely will be worth it in the end.
So as computer science, or maybe now that computer science is really central to these fields, it seems like what you're saying is computing is really a superset of those who are, say, traditional computer science, but also those who have expertise in healthcare and public policy and anthropology. Like there's this huge world where computing is part of everything, but everybody is also part of computing.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. I've actually never liked the term computer science. It always felt like a cry for help to me. I think computing captures something broader and bigger about what we ought to be interested in. And I mean, look, we in the College of Computing, we have lawyers on our faculty, we have ethnographers, we have people who live at the metal, we have people who worry about human interaction, we have machine learning people, we have roboticists, we have people from all kinds of backgrounds, and computing has to be broad enough to get it. Important in this, though, is understanding that although computing is everywhere and changing everything, you won't be able to get a history degree in a few years without understanding fundamental computing and computer science. It is also true that the outside world, the non-computing world, has completely changed what computing is. We inherit our models from others. It helps us to think about the fundamental problems that we're doing, whether it's in theory or whether it's in engineering. It changes the way we see ourselves. And so it's not that computing is coming in and saving the day and making all of those other people better. I mean, computing is coming in and saving the day and making all of those people better. But all those people are coming in and saving the day and making computing better. And so you have to embrace both of those things, that computing will change the things outside of it and will be changed by those things that are outside of it. And everyone will be better again once you accept that and you incorporate it into your day-to-day.
So I hear people, people, people.
And occasionally people.
So I'm going to say in the School of Interactive Computing, we do like to say that the human, i.e. people, are really central to everything that we do. And so if I think about this role of humans and people in the computing field in general, what are the implications, if you think about this, in terms of our courses, in terms of the different types of programs that we might envision for the future in the College of Computing?
So, I mean, there's a lot of things one could say about that. I think, in fact, my view about all of these things is that all your value system is operationalized through your degree programs, right? And so we have to be able to answer the question of our values through degree programs. But let's pop up a level. Let me tell you something about what I believe about computing fundamentally. I believe that computing fundamentally is different from engineering, it's different from the sciences, it's different from math in a very particular way. And I think it's that computationalist, fundamentally grok, that models, languages, and machines are equivalent. So your listeners can't see me, but I'm making a triangle. Models, languages, machines, they're all the same thing. And then we see that. But what's interesting about computing, besides that observation, is in that triangle, it's held up by people. None of it means anything if it doesn't somehow affect the human experience. And because it's important and central, it's going to affect the human experience whether we want to or not. So fundamentally, human beings have to be a part of that. What's driven the growth in computing over the last decade or two is the growth in data and the growth in computational power to crunch on that data. That's why we're affecting everyone else. But almost all of that data is basically generated by human beings. There's stars in the sky and there are comets going by and things are happening and that's all beautiful and everything. But when you think about how much it's changed our own experiences, is because human beings are basically creating data, traces, and of how they interact with one another, and that is what's driving a lot of the interesting things about computing. It's the fundamental human questions. So our degree programs have to reflect that. So as you well know, we have a PhD in human-centered computing. Right? I think that was a crucial thing for us to do. When you look at our robotics degrees, for example, it turns out that what Georgia Tech is particularly good at is robotics that interacts with human beings, right? We're worrying about building machines that'll be companions, worried about building machines that will serve us as we get older and we want to age in place. Even the work that I do in machine learning is about modeling human behavior. It's about influencing human behavior. A lot of what makes Georgia Tech special is its size, and a lot of what makes Georgia Tech even more special is that in the end, we tend to connect those things to humans. Even the fundamental stuff we do in theory, the things that we think through and we prove a theorem here and there, ultimately what drives, I think, so much of what we do is that we're going to see how it touches the rest of the world. And what does it mean to touch the rest of the world if you aren't touching humans? So if our degree programs don't do that, then we are doing a disservice, and we certainly aren't living up to the idea that computing has to be central in the rest of education, the rest of research, and fundamentally in the human endeavor.
So given that I'm human, at least last I looked, I like this concept of human-centered and the college really believing that that is central to computing as we move forward. So I have one last question for you. If you think back over your time in this field, what has inspired you to continue pursuing your research, these new initiatives you have planned for the college? What's the one thing that gets you out of the bed excited in the morning?
Impact, the chance to change the world. So, people ask me all the time, why would you walk down this particular path? Why do you still continue to do your best to do research? Why do you continue to teach? I won't be teaching on campus in the future, but I will continue to teach online. I expect to touch 3,000 or 4,000 students a year this way. I do it because it's a visible mechanism of impact. I decided to walk down this administrative path. I published 100 papers or so, and I could publish another 100 or so, and that's great, and I would have been very fulfilled by that. Or I could have become an administrator and tried to support other people and do what they do. So I may not teach 50 students directly or raise 12 grad students next year, but if I can help facilitate other people to do that, I'm still having the impact that I do. If I can help to create a new degree program or build a relationship with a large company or bring people to Atlanta who otherwise would not be here, then I'm having an impact. And knowing that I can get up and I will, as I walked on this campus, many, many decades ago, and I looked across it and I saw a place I had never seen before. I came back 12 years after I left and I saw a city that didn't look anything like it looked when I left it. And after 17 years or so on Georgia Tech's campus, I look out, right now I'm looking out into the skyline of Midtown, and it looks nothing like it did when I came back. I'm hoping that 5 or 10 years from now, it will continue to look different. The people who walk across campus will continue to look different, and I'll know that I had something to do with that.
So impact, changing the world, computing allows us to do this, given that we, of course, think about the human as part of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
Thanks for joining us. So thanks to Dean Isbell for joining the Interaction Hour. We look forward to not just seeing what is in store over the next few years in the college, but being an active part of fulfilling that vision for our next generation of students, educators, researchers, and alums. You can follow that journey online at ic.gatech.edu or on Twitter and Facebook at ic@gt. Thanks for listening.